what can and should large financiers be doing to help well-managed, promising companies move from small or medium companies to larger ones? Given the likelihood of expanding companies to look to neighboring markets, what can we do to get African companies with big growth plans to move into and manage the risks associated with expansion into the poorest and most fragile neighboring states?
How the private sector can support inclusive growth by addressing the value chain. And the main actor of the value chain are SME and other companies. And these companies and the SMEs are across the border of formal and the real economy. We try to bring them back to the real economy. That's one. And there are other companies that we try to bring to be anchored enterprises, enterprises that will be active in the value chain by supporting large investment projects. And this means what does that mean? That means that we finance large projects like port, transport, rail, and things like that. But it doesn't bring a really growth. Our experience is that that doesn't help so much. Also, we have tried in the past, like all multilateral, to do direct financing of SME through line of credits. That also did not bring too much effectiveness in and bring value to the chain of growth. Because most of us, we are doing it from line of credit to good banks, and then we don't want to take the risk in our portfolio for rating and other considerations. So we tried this initiative that consists of two components. The first component to address the funding, and the second component to address diversification of product, the market going cross-border and regional for some of the companies that we identify as potential growth anchor.
The Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. I'm the CEO of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. I think the first observation that we had when we started was obviously the challenge of equity and having ample equity to grow these businesses, and that is something that I see as a challenge for most of the small and medium-scale enterprises that we have come across. The second thing is obviously what Jean-Philippe mentioned earlier, which is the cost and duration of debt, which remains an ongoing problem. I'm sure we all know this. Our experience, and we made an investment, I think recently, we announced a commitment of $100 million in debt to a local gas processing and transportation company, which we hope will make that transition into something fairly large over time within Nigeria, while helping solve basic infrastructure issues like power.
I'd like to tell us the story of a few companies which have made it, and during that story, I wanted to think about the classic SME rhetoric. We often confuse venture capital with SME development, and we forget the development that we need, the examples of winning businesses in all markets. Why has South Africa got 88 of the biggest? Because there are examples around clustering benefits. Standards are set. When there are some winners, and you've seen it in Nigeria of late as businesses have come through and scaled up. And I think the Dangote Group is one great example, which gives ambition to a region, which gives ambition to a place, and other businesses to grow. So I would suggest, from the World Bank Group and IFC point of view, you are big, and you're big ticket players, and I think it's time we develop the big ticket as well, and not just the politically popular small, because you need them actually to spawn and support the small. What would Korea have been without the Kai ball? The Korean government's trying to beat up the Kai ball for the last 15 years, if you read the local press. Samsung just keeps growing. But look at all those other businesses and the skills and the clustering stuff that's created. If you go and look at the work Ricardo Hausman does at Harvard, which is all about skills development in the economy, and see that clustering is incredibly powerful. So that's the first point. Second point is...
So we decided to develop a company that develops projects and takes the risk up front to be able to do the studies, to actually make the projects fundable. Because in the infrastructure class, you appreciate that it's always been seen as unfundable or very difficult to put together any kind of structure. And so we work in these three sectors, and we build ports, we build roads, we build railways, energy projects. We are in gold and copper and iron ore, in tin and coal. We grow bananas, tomatoes, and macadamia nuts. And we're also in cement. And the thing that we are finding is there are many projects, but not all projects are bankable. And so our job becomes, how do you choose the best projects to be able to make bankable, number one. Number two, how do you work with governments that really do want to develop? One of the things that we were very surprised about is it takes so long to be able to get projects to close. And one assumes that in countries where there's such an opportunity for development, governments would welcome people like us with open arms and really ensure that those lead times are short. Well, this is not a fact. So we have come to understand that also as African governments, we're probably the only businesses, we're based in South Africa but operate throughout the continent. We're the only private businesses that don't have our governments come with us when we want to invest across our own continent. So when we come to Tanzania or to Ghana or to Angola, we find the Germans, and the German government is there with their German banks. We find the Chinese are there with their Chinese banks, supporting those companies, ensuring that those companies are successful. We're on our own, and yet we're trying to stimulate businesses that are African. Our banks, we are the third in line when we're looking for funding, and yet with these other countries, their banks are talking to the politicians. Now, I've spoken to a few presidents in the continent to try and find out what the problem is, and their biggest position is they're quite concerned that when they come with their companies, it's always seen as corruption in its African businesses, and it's never seen as actually promoting businesses in Africa. But it's a challenge because if we are going to grow companies that operate across the continent, there has to be participation from Africans. To be able to ensure that business is sustainable, there has to be involvement of Africans and of women.
Africa is now in a position where we are telling our own stories, and we also want to consume our own stories, which is a very, very, very important evolution to the space. There are, of course, many advantages of the media and entertainment space in Africa. It is one where understanding a large proportion of the young people that make up a large proportion of the continent are very attracted to the sector. It's definitely a place where you can create a lot of jobs. It does foster education, and more importantly, provides a great platform for changing perceptions globally about our continent. Yes, we do have a young continent. The time for, again, looking at the sector in much more serious ways is now better than ever before. Based on more macroeconomic forces such as more stable governments, regulation and privatization of this sector is really spurring a lot of growth. At the same time, it does provide opportunities like our company and Viacom. As Viacom, I represent a whole bunch of brands that we've launched into Africa. We started, of course, with our MTV brand as a case study. We looked at Africa. The investment idea was not to approach Africa in the way that we approached launching an MTV channel, for instance, in Europe, where you put a channel together and you get the content. For us, we have to look at it differently. How do we foster how do we actually help to create the content from that perspective? How do we actually form part of the supply chain for the content that we need to place on our channel? So we have to do a lot of development, build capacity. We have to train people, we have to train young people, the producers, the directors, the musicians, on how to create better content. Of course, it helped us create a unique proposition for our brand, but more importantly, it helped to actually elevate the creative landscape on that front, which has been very, very powerful in what you see today. In the music front, for instance, African music is traveling not only across Africa, but obviously into the other parts of the world now. A quick anecdote, a friend of mine whose daughter is going to school and went to a party at MIT was there and saying that they're listening to African music at MIT.